Goorin, welcome to Resilient Retail. I am so excited to have you, even though we struggled to get on the call together because I evidently suck at sending good calendar invites. Can you start out by telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and who Goorin Bros is?
Sure. My name's Wyse. I am the controller at Goorin Brothers and oversee the parts. I oversee the accounting aspects. I see the operational aspects. I was involved coming into Goorin to prepare them for the omnichannel as we completely rehauled our entire tech stack. So for the last 2 years, I've been living in an ERP, OMS, POS implementation for omnichannel that we built from the ground up. So that's pretty much what I've been doing vast majority of my time for the last 2 years at Goorin Bros. And for people that aren't familiar with the brand, we're a 126-year-old hat company. We started off in 1895 selling they were selling hats off of horseback. It was a wholesale business for a very long time, for 100 years. Became a retail business, and then e-commerce. We had an e-commerce channel and then combined that to an omni-channel. So very old brand, but we've kept up with the times and, keeping innovative to make sure that, we keep the, 126 years and counting.
I think that's the most impressive part of your job is you're not just taking kind of like a new brand that had omni-channel kind of in the mindset from the beginning. You're working with this very old brand who has to adjust their business again and again and again through recessions and pandemics. And so this is almost not new for the brand, but it's a very big technological leap from where you guys started. Before we get into the omnichannel, because I'm so excited that you are so deeply rooted in the operational side of it, because it's something that I think we miss a lot on this show. From your perspective, there's so many definitions of omni-channel. So many experts call it different things. From, coming from the world that you work in, how do you define omni-channel?
So I'd break down omni-channel selling, inventory from any location to any customer in your direct channel. If you had a wholesale aspect of that, you're ahead of the game. Most people don't have like a direct channel that's combined with the wholesale. So, your direct channel, you have inventory in stores or warehouses, and you're selling it to your customers either through your website or through your brick and mortar locations. So that's what I define it as. And you can sell the inventory at your retail store to your web customer and retail customer, and then your warehouse customer, your retail customer, and your web customer can access that.
Yeah, I love that definition because it simplifies it down so much. But also, it kind of complicates it, especially when we're looking at a brand like Goorin Bros that has not just like online and retail, but multiple retail. How many stores are you guys running right now?
Right now, we have 16 retail locations. We're opening up another store in 2 weeks in the Mission District of San Francisco that's dedicated to our farm brand. So that's how many retail locations that we're currently running. And then we're looking to open up and hopefully another soon in Dallas, Texas.
Oh, I'm from Dallas. How fun. So take me back to like that first day. I mean, obviously not the first day, but kind of when you joined Goorin and you were given this like large project of, can you step us up into a technologically advanced omni-channel company? What were the first things you started looking at and had to face?
It was just more like understanding, what the organization wanted to do and looking at what we had done before. We had some unlike, yes, we're an older brand as our legacy brand, I guess is the correct word to use. So we've had familiar with some of the complicated, technology systems. We weren't, starting from completely from scratch, but we were running on systems that were kind of antiquated and weren't suitable for how fast things were changing because it's been a lot of, technological changes in the last 8 years. It wasn't just, it was multiple different events that were, affected that, the retail apocalypse. So it was, looking at what we were doing, what we wanted to do was looking at the systems that would help us to scale. That was the most important thing, was just looking at the scale of it, because you can't, when you start looking at systems, it's always enticing to kind of go after the, cheaper short-term solutions. But when you're scaling, you can't think that way, and it becomes very complicated. So we wanted to, we were 24 years at that time. So we wanted to make sure that, or we weren't planning to go out of business. So we were going to make sure that we're going to invest in infrastructure that allow us to scale for a long time And that was right where everything started going to cloud. So almost all of our services are based off cloud services, like using NetSuite, which is our ERP system. That was our big changeover, that we wanted to go to an ERP system like NetSuite that the vast majority of our industry is on. And when the vast majority of our industry is on that, it makes things really easy to scale because all the applications are, mostly directed toward that group. That was kind of the foundation of what we were going to use as our omnichannel solution, because we wanted to use the, technologies that were adequate to scale. We weren't going to look for a short-term solution. And it was a very, very big project, because it's more or less, when you from people who are not familiar with like an ERP implementation, it's essentially tearing down every single business process you have, every single one period, and rebuilding them all back up in different workflows, and a system that touches all of your departments. A lot of smaller companies, they're running QuickBooks. These are very simplified versions. There is an ocean of complexity once you start working in like an Oracle or an SAP style system. And that's kind of the biggest change that was kind of getting used to, is just how complicated and all encompassing these systems are when they are the central nervous system of your business. So we wanted to make sure, and knowing that is the central nervous system of your business, we want to make sure that we had a very, very strong nervous system, that because it's in our company's DNA. 124s at that time, pandemic, world wars. Now, unbeknownst to us, we were going to face a second pandemic. So our vision is always long-term investment in scaling and smart decisions and infrastructure, and making sure that we were investing in technology partners that were going to be long-term partners and helping us build the business, and we're able to adapt with the changes was like the most important part of going through our entire scoping process for all of our systems for becoming a omnichannel company.
Yeah, the tech side of omnichannel is something that doesn't get talked about as much because it's not as like sexy or fun, but like you're saying, it's the central nervous system of, you can't like do all the omni-channel retention things like buy online, pick up in store, or curbside pickup, or sending the right email to the right customer without a system that can first and foremost handle that. So I'm guessing that project, just the technical side, took up a lot of your time in the last 2 years. And then the pandemic hits, whatever pandemic this is that now the brand has had to go through. How did that shift the way you were looking at omnichannel, and what were the things you had to start thinking about?
I mean, it didn't shift it too much, because, what I had kind of based my, when the design was looking at the retail apocalypse, because we had just also survived the retail apocalypse, and it was the idea that there's like these shocks and awes in retail are becoming, they're becoming bigger and more sustained. So we needed to be flexible and understanding that, we'll have these big periods of growth, and then there'll be these big periods of contractions. And what you see in retail, that a lot of retail companies that fails because they get death by overhead. They ramp up so fast and have such a big overhead that once sales drops, they don't have the cash flow anymore to meet their liabilities. They get into debt agreements with private equity that are very hard to get out of. And then it becomes a very hard situation to get yourself out of. So it was looking at what was going on in retail and saying, well, this is the nature of the business now. And we had to plan for these. So when COVID happened, it was something that, we weren't planning for COVID. We were planning for retail apocalypse 3.0, whatever. So when it hit, we were already kind of planning for it. So we were almost well positioned, because we were already doing buy online, pick up in store. We were already doing store fulfillment. The idea was that we wanted to, root, because, e-commerce could become really big, and then people might go back to retail or e-commerce, but having that ability to flex back and forth is what we needed to support. So COVID wasn't really a factor. In fact, it was difficult for us, like all retailers. We experienced pretty much the same metrics as everyone else. It was difficult, but we got through. And a big part of why we got through is because we had planned for like this retail apocalypse 3.0. And our ability to plan was by addressing it through like an omnichannel solution. And that is what really what helped us, because as everyone knows, stores were closed, but omnichannel allowed us, while our stores were closed, is that we were able to sell through a lot of our inventory that was trapped in our stores to our web customers. And that just generated, 60% of the items that we fulfilled last year between our 3PL, 60% of that came from our retail stores in the fourth quarter. So when we had never done that before, and it was just, we had to switch operation to make sure the business was going to keep going. We had to sell this inventory because of COVID. We weren't able to buy lots of inventory because there's so many supply constraints. So we needed to get this inventory, and we needed to get our customers, and this omni-channel is, what saved us. But we weren't playing for COVID. We were playing for retail apocalypse. And because we were really planning for this disaster scenario that we were expecting for like a few more years, we were able to do pretty well. And it was, kind of exceeded some of my expectations when we were started. You put these things on paper and you test them, but when you put them in the real world, it's always interesting to see how they start working.
It's so interesting that buy online, pick up in store story that you just told, because I find it so interesting and almost shocking that for a lot of people, like now buy online, pick up in store, or curbside pickup, or curbside delivery, local delivery, after the last year are starting to feel like normal things, and almost like we expect that from a lot of retailers.
Yeah.
But before this pandemic, like not a lot of places were doing that. It is kind of this newer experience for customers, but you guys already had that kind of in the workings. Obviously sounds like you had to scale that up a whole lot really quickly. And buy online, pick up in store sounds very simple on the surface when we say it, like we're telling you exactly what it is. But I'm sure it is anything but simple, especially across so many stores. Can you walk us through some of the like nitty gritty of buy online, pick up in store and how you guys have made it so successful?
Sure. So buy online, pick up in store, just finding it's like omnichannel. It's an order sent from your website. So your Shopify, we'll use in this case, so sent from your Shopify e-commerce website to your OMS. Your OMS sends it to your store, and your store fulfills that order and keeps it for a customer to go pick up. Sounds really, really easy. So if you have one location, and let's say like you're like a plant store, a house plant store, and you have a Shopify website and using like the Shopify POS, that's really easy because you have your inventory is on Shopify, and it looks at it, says, yes, they have 5 house plants. Here's your house plant for pickup, and that customer knows it's very easy. So, when buy online, pick up in store, like at one location with one inventory location, even with like one e-commerce channel, sounds really easy. Now, when you start scaling that, that's, like I said, that's when the complexity comes in, because when you start having multiple retail locations, you have inventory different levels. And then that comes a question is, how does that order come in? If you have inventory that's only reserved for retail sales, and you have a situation where somehow buy online, pick up in store reserves all the inventory, and people from online aren't coming and pick up on those orders, but people in the retail store see those orders sitting on your plate, then how do you separate that? It becomes really, really complicated once you start scaling. So, and then if you don't have if you don't have a true omnichannel solution, you have everything siloed. So then you have all these, priorities of how does it come in and compete with these other orders. And, that's like the technical background, but then you have the operational background that you really don't think. So your houseplant store, going back to earlier, is like you have lots of customers that like buying online, but picking up in store, maybe then your expectations, they're going to come in and pick that up in a day or two. Reality is they may come and pick that up in 2 or 3 weeks. So your little houseplant store that you have a little small inventory location starts getting full of all these in-store fulfillment locations. You don't know what to do with them anymore. And now you don't know to cuss it. You realize that they're all piling up is because the messaging mechanism wasn't sending your customers that this order was ready for pickup, because they only saw that the order was being fulfilled. You didn't realize that you had to go in and click the order fulfilled to send a message to your customer. And that's why you had to pick up all this. And that's when you run into the complexity of scaling these things, because you have the technology aspect and you have the operational aspect. And those two usually are never, the engineers that design the applications typically aren't really using them in real life, and they kind of expect that how they design them is how they think, and then you use them, and then you have your customers use them completely different from your intentions. So you run into these really fun situations that become very complicated, and you think to yourself, of course, why the order should just be there, easy to be picked up. And it's like, no, well, you have all these other issues. And let's say if you're using the houseplant stores, you have your inventory location and you have hot houseplant drops, and people really want to get these houseplants, but you only have a few of them. Well, now you have a sellout, and you have people that are coming in to fulfill the orders, but pick up the orders, and you're going to start overselling now. And because you kind of segregated the inventory, it's really hard because, well, what inventory level does it go to or pick out of? And then that's where it becomes really, really complicated. And that's where you really spend most of your time while you're working in these omnichannel solutions, is working out all these really fun exceptions. And it came in here as this order, but was supposed to go into this channel, and it's stuck there, and it was never supposed to go there. We don't know how it got there. And yeah, that's the complicated part. And if you don't really have a good technology aspect, if you have a really so if you have like an old tech stack that you're forcing these things to do, then these things really break, and then it's really fun.
Yeah, one of the most common things we hear when people are getting onto Shopify point of sale and trying to doing that omni-channel with Shopify, which is such a good solution when you're at that kind of like 1-2 store. Once you start scaling, like you're talking about, you got to get even more technologically advanced. But the thing we hear all the time is inventory management is a job of its own, and a lot of people are doing it in 2 different systems. So you get to the end of the day, you're checking your shelves, you're writing it down, then you're going over to your online store, and then you're filling that in the e-commerce website. One, that's so much time that you're wasting that can be automated. And 2, right, you run into those issues of, if I wait till the end of the day to go update my inventory online, what if someone has bought this houseplant that I just sold, and now I've got an e-commerce customer who's waiting longer than they expected. And that is, I think, so quickly can cannibalize into bad customer experiences. If there's someone who's listening to this who has that kind of like 1-2 store situation, they're starting to get an e-commerce site up and running. They're on one solution across channels, but they're hearing you say these things and they're like, oh my God, there's probably so many holes in my system. How do you go start to find those things that are breaking before they get so bad that your customers are upset with you?
Unfortunately, usually if you're at that stage, you're not very, realistically, people with the technological backgrounds are probably working at mid-enterprise level companies. Mm-hmm. So you're probably not paying for that person. So you usually find out through the bad customer experience. That's usually how it is, because you're running a smaller team and you don't know like how some of these systems work. Like, to go back to earlier, is omnichannel means that you're just using one inventory system for your direct systems. Vast majority of companies that are retail are going to have a retail inventory location and an e-commerce inventory location. And fewer of those people have automated it to a point where they're talking to each other, or at least reserving orders in the other inventory system, because you're most likely using one inventory system and you're doing some kind of manual inventory process. You may not even have a full-time inventory person at that point. And that's really, really hard to, you're kind of one, realistically, is like, you're not going to want to put a lot of investment to your headcount at that point. So you're kind of going to be stuck with it. And you really want to put money into company to grow it. So my advice to people is understanding that you have to keep things simple. And this is what I call, it's like Amazon. Amazon came in and made everything unfair, because everyone is shopping on Amazon, expects, Amazon, hey, it should work like Amazon. But yes, Amazon has tens of thousands of engineers on their payroll. Yeah. So they can make these applications overnight. Yes, they have, the vast majority of retail companies, if they're working like a mid-engineer size product, they have 5 engineers that are working. 2 of them are part-time, maybe 3 of them are full-time. And that would be like the height of your engineering process. And Amazon has thousands that were checking in daily. So Amazon has created like a really unfair expectation of how companies are supposed to operate. Everyone kind of scrambles to get it because like everyone's taking advantage of buy online, pick up in stores easy. This is easy. It's like, it's not really easy. Technology has just really become affordable and scaled. It's still complicated. It's the technology is more accessible and it doesn't cost tens of thousands of dollars. It's only thousands of dollars now, but the complexity is still there. So my advice to everyone is you want to do things like Amazon or these big box retail companies. And yes, there's an expectation and pressure, but if you do these things and scale them incorrectly, you're ultimately going to create negative customer experiences. So it's understanding you want to do these things, but you also have to operate within the restrictions that you want to. Now, if you want to take your profit and invest it to do some of these technological things, it's ultimately a decision of your company. But I would say that, it's when you're still early, you still don't really know what kind of business you have or how to scale it. And you may be putting too much money in after bad and not realizing it until you're too deep. So you want to keep things simple and affordable because as you scale, these things are always going to be complicated and expensive. And there's no way around that because you're dealing with engineers, you're dealing with time materials. There's this idea that you can get things for cheaper. It's like, no, it's accountants, lawyers, engineers. You're paying for their time. You're paying for them to build something custom to your business. There are some starting points, but everything is custom. You really have to understand your business. You have to understand that you can't do all the things Amazon wants to do. Yes, there's pressures from your customers that want these things. There's technology that enable to do it, but you have to ultimately pick and choose and be smart about how you do these things, how you invest in them, and you have to be realistic about what things you can and can't do. For examples, you may be able to do really, really easy in-store fulfillment and sales domestically, right? But your e-commerce division wants to sell to Canada and they can easily do that. But the problem is you don't have anything set up domestically to send to your Canadian customers. So those orders can't be shipped or they get, stopped at the border. So at that point you have to say like, I can't do sales to Canada until, technology becomes easier or I do things. People run into failure when they try to do all these things with an omnichannel solution. And it's like, yes, omnichannel is great. If it works, everything works. If it breaks, everything breaks. And that is what I just say about omnichannel is it works, it's fast, it's a great solution, but if it breaks, everything breaks. And because it will break everything, you have to have certain restrictions and you can't just do all these things. And kind of the shipping to Canada will be like, in-store fulfillment to international delivery is a pretty common limitation right now, and then you can force these things through, but you'll have customer service people manually pushing and fixing things, and then you have to ask yourself, well, if all these customer service interactions are negative, and I'm having all these people put all their time in manually pushing orders, am I even making money off this just to solve things? And then that's ultimately where I think where a lot of companies are running into difficulty right now, because you have to realize if you want to do these technological things, here are these technologies, but you have to be very conservative and constrained, and you have to operate within the structure. And if you want to operate outside of it, you run into these problems. Or if you want to scale beyond what you can because they tell you can, doesn't actually mean like operationally you can support it.
Yeah, I say this so often in these interviews, and we hear it all the time, and it's actually one of my complaints about the term omnichannel is it almost has this connotation of like you have to be everywhere. And now there's endless places to sell. You can be from your retail store, direct to consumer on Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, like that you could do anything in the world you want. And especially for a brand that doesn't have a massive team, especially a massive team of engineers and developers, trying to do all of that at once means, like you said, then everything starts to break and there's not even a single good experience happening. A lot of the advice I'm giving to small retailers is, okay, I know that like somebody next to you might be doing amazing curbside pickup, but if you don't have a parking spot that functions well for curbside pickup, or your customers don't want to come do curbside pickup, then you don't need to add it in just because somebody else does. And making that call out with Amazon too is very important. you can't compete with Amazon on things like fulfillment and price because like the money and the team they have and the resources they have. So picking and choosing what channels and what pieces of that omnichannel you can do and do really well, I think is a caveat that's so important. Of it's not just about being able to set it up, but setting it up where it makes a good customer experience. This brings me to another interesting point about omnichannel is that it's a push-pull, it feels like, between two things: the technological operational side and then also the messaging and customer experience side. How do you make sure those two things stay consistent so you're not kind of like outpacing with technology on the side that the customer experience team can do, or that the tech isn't living up to what your customers are asking for? How do you balance the two sides of omnichannel?
So I guess, just to continue on one point, is just in retail, there's this the idea that, we're always chasing novelties, or, there's always novelty to bring customers in. And yeah, that's a big part of it. But you also understand that, there's a limit to that. So it's really finding a balance of that. It's this, I want to bring in customers to these new marketing mechanisms, but we have to be realistic about what we can do because there has to be new. So the balance is you kind of always you have to bring out, like what we did is that we kind of had e-commerce as a different channel and retail as a different channel. And we just had to bring everyone together and say, well, this is, now it's just the direct channel. It's the direct consumer channel. And we have an e-commerce side and we have a retail side. And we're going to unify the channels and we have to make it work, and we have to work together in the sense that, we're going to have these shared resources looking at inventory, and we're going to have these areas. So that's a part where it's kind of hard to specifically point out because, I guess what I'll use is, as a template of what would be kind of like a small to mid enterprise company where you may have an external warehouse, you have like a Shopify website, and maybe have one or two retail locations. So when you begin scoping that, it's just understanding, what you want to do and going why you want to do channels that you want to have your 3PL, which is your third-party fulfillment, that's probably going to be filling most of your web orders and sending distro to your stores. And then you have your retail heads that are looking at their stores, and you kind of have your e-commerce head that's looking at the inventory that's in the warehouse that they're primarily selling. And there's kind of discussion between the retail and e-commerce side of what they want. Now, the e-commerce side, do they want every single order to be fulfilled at a store at all the time, or at a certain point, or at the warehouse? How does e-commerce, want? Because if you're coming in retail, you want to protect a certain amount of your inventory, because going back to negative customer experiences, if you have a customer, there's, a lot of customers like to, they look at your website and they come in your store. If you come into a store and you don't have inventory there, it's usually not like a good customer experience. So you always have to bring you have to understand that when you're omnichannels, you're going to have the omnichannel customer is the customer that, buys online and shops in store. And we found that's usually about 5 to 10% of our customers. It's not like the omnichannel customers, they sell you on is huge. It's there, but, and they are more valuable, but in terms of overall contribution, because they are buying more and you can, judge that easier. And, you kind of look at that customer as well. This retailer is going to shop online. Are they going to see the same thing in our retail stores as our online stores? It kind of look the difference. It's marrying those two aspects. And that would be the customer facing side, because the customer, it'd be, if a customer facing side, they don't know what omnichannel is. They don't know any of this technology stuff is, because that's ultimately invisible to them. What they will see is they'll see your e-commerce channel and they'll see how you merchandise it, and they'll come into your store and they'll kind of be like, does your online store aesthetic match your retail store aesthetic? Is the merchandise, like if I come in, if there's a certain house plant that I see that I come into your store front and center, and if I click your e-commerce site, is that the first item that pops up on like the product display page is like this item?
Yeah.
So that's the stuff that's more front facing, and that is the stuff that you're going to operations have to figure out between your retail and e-commerce teams of how do we link this, because the technological aspects can be like, how do we reserve inventory allocations? How do we distribute this? How do we want to protect inventory? How do we want to ship things? Do we want to, what do we want to have that are, features like buy online, pick up in store, or these, exchanges where they can buy online, return in store? How do we want like all those things to work, because they all become complicated. And what kind of example that we ran into in the pandemic was we were doing in-store fulfillment, we were doing regular store retail sales, and we were doing everything at once, and it kind of became like a hard thing to juggle. And that was probably the aspect that'd be more, at the initial, that's more like your customers would probably see, because they couldn't do these things before. So now, I can't return in store, I can't do these things. And they'll see you kind of juggling the operational aspect of it, because let's say you have a retail store and in-store fulfillment, let's say you did, like in pandemic, most people were expecting stores to be cut up. So, you have a store that's cut up here, and you have the front-facing side where your inventory is retails, and you have like a fulfillment side. Well, if you're packing packages where your customers in store, they want to hear tape and packaging tape while you're doing that. Not really. So then that's other also aspect is, how do we staff stores? Do you want to have in-store fulfillment do before and after? Well, if they're doing before and after, there could be inventory timing locations. So if you don't do it early enough in the morning, some of the inventory you're supposed to pick to be fulfilled could be oversold, and you have to refund those orders. And that would be more those are things that, you will never really think about until you're kind of in it. But that's a part where you have to balance, like, well, we can do all these things technology wise, but we have to balance the operational aspect. And the operational aspect is staffing. It's creating the workflow. How do you organize your stores and work with your retail teams? How does the e-commerce communicate? Because if you're doing buy online, pick up in store, the e-commerce team has to support those customers, and you have to talk to retail customers. Our customer service, they support, the entire omnichannel. Since we have omnichannel solution, it makes it easier. If you didn't have an omnichannel solution, you'd have to fracture your customer service to be able to address those things. And, it's all those little things that you really have to think about, and it becomes, really complicated for sure. And that's what kind of goes back, is you really have to be, if you want to grow and do all these things, you have to bring the e-commerce and retail, and you really have to walk through these processes together, because it's omnichannel. So everyone has to talk to each other. Some duties that were here may be merged together with someone else's duties, and it's walking through and thinking through all these scenarios. And it becomes really complicated, because it's not like, well, previously we had our store retail, it couldn't touch the e-tail. So we received the order here, we put the inventory here, cash in, cash out. We have our e-commerce inventory here, cash in, cash out. I mean, that's simple. That's how usually it's set up. But once you combine the two, you have competing priorities, you have employees, let's say you have in-store fulfillment, your employees that have sales goals may not want to fulfill that stuff if that's their best product. Let's say, like, if it's Sunday or Saturday and Sunday, and it's the last day of the week, and they know that these products are going to help them meet their sales goals, and they're on edge, but they now have e-commerce orders are seeing the channel that they're purposely not going to fulfill because they want to make their sales goals. Once again, it's all these operational things that you really have to think about. And it becomes really complicated. So omnichannel solution is great in the terms that but it's really, really complicated to get inventory from any location to any customer. And it's just thinking about how all these things are working. And since you're working with a lot of new technologies, it's a lot of these ideas are brand new and unfamiliar to a lot of people. I mean, they were unfamiliar to me, and I was kind of trial and error, learning how a lot of this stuff works, because it is, very new.
It sounds like one of the biggest struggles in omnichannel is not even so much on the tech side, which is a whole thing in and of itself, but also you have to consider like the mindset of the brand you're working for, that previously that retail and e-commerce were really siloed from each other. And the way you measured success, the metrics you looked at, how you attributed sales and revenue was all either one channel or the other. And now you're asking those channels and the people who are running those channels to be okay with sharing all of that. And that seems like it's probably a very big barrier, is even more so than anything else, is like the mindset and the understanding of what omnichannel means to a customer and how that actually helps whoever that customer support agent is or the salesperson. How did you guys start to have those discussions, and did you find any solutions for attributing sales or making sure people were actually working together in a collaborative way?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely the most difficult aspect, and it's complicated. So I don't know how to. So I would say, yeah, you're going to change your metrics for sure. That's like you're going to have to change them because you're now omnichannel. It's different. You know, you may have a store that does fulfillment much better than any other store, but may have, you know, infoot traffic that's lower and sales that are lower. But because of its location, you know, maybe cheaper shipping costs, and because your living costs aren't as expensive, like say, like in, you know, San Francisco, it's more affordable to run operational aspects of it. So you can't compare that store to a store like our flagship San Francisco store that, you know, they're completely different. They're completely different. So it's not a one size fits all shoe, because now you're omnichannel. You're not just selling. You now can fulfill out of stores. You can. Well, and there's another thing that we introduce is, you know, clienteling. Yeah, if you go on our website, we have an app through Heroes, which is an intake mechanism that allows people to talk to our employees in our retail store. And then through our omnichannel solution news store, our employees can talk amongst each other. So there's always kind of communication going on between each other. And that's like a big important part too.
Yeah. Oh, I just thinking about that, like metric conversation in and of itself becomes crazy, because whatever you've tracked success before now totally changes, where foot traffic in a store is not as important as how many orders have you fulfilled, whether that was from somebody walking in or somebody ordering online. So you have to start to rethink how you measure everything. What do you think in the last 2 years of working with Goorin and really working on leveling up the omni-channel, what do you think has been kind of the most successful thing that you have put in place that you feel has really strengthened the entire experience?
I mean, I'd say it's more background. It's, you know, when we switched to the NetSuite ERP system, that was a big thing for us. That made things a lot easier. The other systems that we use are, you know, far more complicated. So for us to have, you know, everything in like an ERP system that was, you know, relatively easy to use, allowed, you know, us operationally to see everything, because a lot of these applications, you know, they're just kind of passing information through to the actual ERP system. So for us, it was having an ERP system that was really easy, and we were able to customize it to make it a lot more accessible to people. You didn't have to have a computer science degree, or you didn't have to, you know, have a really sophisticated understanding of finance to be able to navigate, you know, a system like that. And because, you know, a system like NetSuite, which is everything is on that system, and that's why it's an omnichannel like solution, because everything is running through that system. That was, you know, a really big game changer for us, just operationally, is having everything on there and having everyone on the company be able to, you know, regardless of what, you know, application they're working on, to see everything. That was, you know, a big thing from the management perspective of having a system that was that unified and fast, because that is, you know, that's kind of like the brain of everything. That was the biggest change, and just having the speed of that information coming in and being able to see kind of all that detail and accessibility. That was, I mean, that's not like the glamorous part, but that is the kind of engine that runs everything, and it's been the most beneficial part. And it's because it's kind of the whole idea of all these cloud services that are online, connected to each other, sharing information really fast. It's just, you know, these solutions that are coming out, omnichannel, you know, all these things, you know, that's really what's powering all this, I'd say.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that visibility across multiple employees as well. That's something, especially in a small retail store, where you have a store associate who becomes like the Goorin Brothers store associates that you're talking about that use Hero. They are experts in the products and they know how to talk to customers, and giving them visibility into why are you talking to online customers, or why are we fulfilling in store somebody who didn't come through you, being able to have access to some of that. It's something that Adam Levine from Hero and I talk a lot about on the show, which was this evolving role of the store associate, where all of a sudden you are becoming an e-commerce expert and a sales associate and a fulfillment specialist and all of these things. So making sure there is that central location of information, and that multiple people, all of the employees who need to have access to it. Of course, you said this isn't like the most glamorous part of it, but it is the most important part of it. Can you tell us like a fun, glamorous story from your omni-channel experience, something that you guys did that you were like, that was just really cool and fun?
Yeah, the fun part is this is of course the batteries dead, but when we, all our stores run off of an iPhone like that, so that is the computer in all of our stores. So the fun part with that was just, we set this, we went live in the pandemic, and what I did was, it was just me, our IT person that does our networking, and the store associate. So we were drop shipping the stuff in the pandemic right around May, and it was just, doing phone conversations. It was setting up all this stuff. And usually when people aren't familiar with this, usually when you're installing a POS system, you have to have a customized service come out. They do kind of wiring everything. It's really expensive, but I did the entire thing with drop shipping iPhones that have all of our applications that are connected to our systems on there. So, and setting all that up and just it being really easy. It's like, call in, we get the network set up.
Yeah.
We send the iPhones, they load all the apps, and it's up and running in about 2 to 3 hours. Seeing that come to life and just seeing how fast everything turned on was interesting. The entire, when you work on a project for this long, it's kind of hard to see the light at the end of tunnels. So seeing everything, we used to have these big computers to condense everything to a single iPhone. People like the iPhone, then hate it when it came out. It worked out pretty well. So, coming out with the system that people liked and able us to do new things is the exciting part. Being able to do the big parts, we did the clienteling. So over the pandemic, if someone wanted to buy a hat in a store, we could send them a cart to check out, and they could pay through text. So that was a big thing. Cool. We were one of the first retail stores that had the pay by link through Adyen, and put all of our stores in North America during the pandemic. So that was also big, the big accomplishment that we did. So, kind of being one of the first companies to really come out with like the full featured omni-channel platform that's not like a massive big box retail chain was also an accomplishment. So I'd say it was just, watching all these technologies come together that help the organization elevate itself was, the more satisfying aspect. The entire process of, being one of the first really to get up and running with new store, that was just experience in itself. Great experience.
Yeah. That's my favorite thing about omnichannel is it brings together two really cool aspects where technology can help improve a human experience and then build brand new human experiences. And all of that creates something really exciting to me. That's what I'm hearing from you, coming from this very technological background and saying like, that's really exciting to me, but also then to see how that impacts like even the store associates and how they function feels hopeful for, I think, retail, and that technology is not separating it out. It's actually bringing it all closer together. You mentioned at the very top of our conversation that you guys are always really planning for, the ebbs and flows of retail, the fluxes and then the lows. You were planning for Retail Apocalypse 3.0. How are you thinking about the future now? Has the pandemic shifted the way you guys are planning for future changes?
Not really. I'd say what we're looking at is looking at international like everyone else.
Yeah.
But it's really complicated because you're dealing with governments and a lot of technologies that say like, globalization, internationalization, and unified commerce. Those are the new buzzwords for international direct-to-consumer business. Yeah. That's now like the new trend. We're looking at that, but there's this, there's a lot of technologies and they're very young. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with governments, you're dealing with antiquated systems. So you can build a lot of these systems that support it. But I think we're looking for that. And we're kind of still kind of waiting to see what the right solution for that is. And I think that's kind of where a lot of companies are going. But meanwhile, we're refining our omnichannel solution. We're now adding more payment methods. We're looking at how we can do more clienteling, communication with our customers. So refining our omnichannel solution and looking at our direct-to-consumer global channel is what's on the horizon for us.
Awesome. I love that. So exciting and crazy just to think about unified commerce over such a large market and having to deal with that difference in advancement of governments versus the tech that you can have. Reminds me of the parallel between the tech might be able to do crazy things like buy online, pick up in store, and all these things you want to do, but are you advanced enough? Is your business advanced enough to actually do them and do them well? I think it's such a good lesson to pull out of this. Last question for you today, Aaron, as we ask everybody, and I think you're going to have an interesting answer to this. What does resilience mean to you?
Sure. I mean, resilience is being flexible. It's being flexible with the market. You're going to have good markets and you're going to have bad markets. Everyone can do well in a good market, right? It's not that challenging to do well in a good market. The challenge is operating the market like pandemic and being able to switch businesses really fast. And I'm sure a lot of us saw it locally. What restaurants locally did we see not make it? Did they not make it because how were they not adapting to COVID? Because there's restaurants that went out of business. There's some that didn't. Everyone had the same situation. So how they adapt? Same thing that goes next. Being resilient, being flexible. And we were resilient in surviving a lot of these things because we were very looking at our business and saying like, this is what the core that drives our business is. We like these other things, but these other things add weight and they obscure the true direction of where the business goes and what the business needs. Sometimes you have a business that makes a lot of money doing something that you may not find as appetizing as something that's out there, right? But that thing that's out there may cost you your entire business.
Yeah.
And, that's where a lot of people kind of obscure their vision. So I think it's really knowing what you as a business is being flexible and it's being realistic about what you can't accomplish. You want growth, but you want smart growth. And from the valley, there's that move fast and break things. Move fast and break things works great when you have hundreds of millions of dollars in private equity behind you. Because money can solve most of your problems. You can't move fast and break things if you're a single family owned store. You move fast and break things may ruin you financially for the rest of your life. So it's understanding those things and your limitations and working within that and being creative. Like sometimes working within the box and having those constraints will make you be more creative and think through your business process to be more effective than just doing everything outside the box. And that's what I would say. Being flexible, being resilient, being flexible, it's being realistic. You're going to have these storms. You're going to have to know how to weather them. If you built like this entire house of cards that collapses in a storm, you didn't plan well. So that is resilience. It's smart growth, it's scaling smart, it's being realistic because you have to be realistic. And it's, in retail, we have to be idealistic because we have to present a customer. Like, you don't want to be a depressing store. You want to be an uplifting store. You want your customers have a good experience, right? And that's what you ultimately want to do. And you have to have that, right? Because that you want consumer enthusiasm. But you also just have to be realistic that meeting the expectations of your customers, you have to be realistic about what you can do that. Yet with your operational side, you have to make sure you can support it. And knowing that you want to do these things and support that flexibility of being able to determine that you want to do these things, understanding different scenarios that may create hardships for the things you want to do or you're doing. And you really have to find that flex point. Because you're going to have good business, you're going to have to have business, and you have to, and it's from a technology aspect of having the overhead, because you're always going to have tech overhead now with all these cloud services. It's the operational aspect of doing these things. It's the financial aspect of having an accounting team that makes sure these transactions are going right. It's all these things, and as you add on to it, you lose your flexibility unless if you're, and especially if you have like an older tech stack, you're definitely very rigid what you can do. So that is really where I think being resilient now is in this area is now that you, and it's being resilient because these projects are significantly more expensive and you don't really have, you can't really go back and, $100,000 project at your, you realize that you're 6 months, you have a 3-year contract, you're 6 months in, you realize it doesn't work. That's when that you don't have the flexibility and you lose your resilience and you'll be able to change. You have to go out and sign another contract. You have to go dedicate more hours to fix everything. And that's kind of what happens when you don't, that's the end result of not thinking things through and being realistic.
Yeah, I love the lesson that I think a lot of digitally native brands could hear from this. A lot of retailers, I think, brings them a little bit of hope or something they can hold on to that I want to pull out from what you said is all of the tech in the world is not going to fix something as simple as a bad experience or not treating your customers well or your store not having a good energy or vibe to it. You can keep throwing tech at the problem, but unless you have the operational know-how and that flexibility and learning and knowing how much you can handle and how to treat your customers while still trying to grow, then it doesn't matter. The tech is just a distraction that can get expensive. I think it's such a good piece of advice that I wish every digitally native brand, especially highly VC-backed ones, would listen to a little bit. There's power in thinking about the humans instead of the tech.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, that's just, I think it's important just to realize that is that you can do all the things, but you can't do all the things well. You can do a few things well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's ultimately what's going to drive you at the beginning of your business. You're not going to start off like Amazon selling everything. Amazon started off just selling books. And that's kind of how you get business. Make it very simple. It has to be a concentrated effort you're trying to sell.
If anybody who's listening has watched Parks and Rec, just reminds me of the Ron Swanson quote of "Don't half-ass two things, full-ass one thing." And I think that's a great way to wrap this episode. Aaron, thank you so much. It's so nice to be able to go into like this real nitty-gritty of omnichannel and give these merchants a better understanding of what it actually means and looks like and executes. So I really appreciate your time today.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.